Welcome. So in this tutorial, we're going to go over creating a file dialog and then having it save data to files. So for instance, here we'll just pop open a new save dialog. We'll save some information to data.dat file, and then we'll have it open that data and read it back. So now that we're in the editor, we're going to start by just creating a base node. And the first thing we're going to do is have a look at the file dialog. The file dialog is going to be used to generate a path for us, and that path we can then use with FileAccess to actually read and write the files. So we'll start by creating a file dialog. And as you can see, unlike Godot 3, the file dialog is actually in the window tree as opposed to the control tree. So that's going to create a few differences in Godot 4 than 3. So if we toggle the visibility, the first thing you'll notice is that you don't have any controls to actually move around this file dialog. So the only way to really move it around your screen and window is to move it with the positions. So for instance, we can move this 300 pixels to the side, maybe 200 pixels down, and now when we play, we hit play. Now we have access to the dialog. As you'll notice, if you don't do that, and if you don't do that, the window will be stuck at the top, and you can't actually get it without dragging this down. So just FYI, if you want the handlebar, you need to move the window down a little bit. All right. So now that we have access to this, and I'm going to move it back to where it was. So now that we have access to it, you can see if we expand the file dialog, and generally you're going to want to, now you can actually see the folders present, and you can navigate these folders. But as you'll see, it starts out with the resource tree, and so it's just going to be in your active directory. But say you want to get access to the actual file system, how do you do that? So under the file dialog, there is a bunch of settings, and one of the ones we're going to look at, there's file mode, and that's going to select whether you're going to be saving files or opening the files. It doesn't actually change too much in terms of getting you a path, but it will change the way the user interacts with the dialog. So we'll see that in a little bit when we go through that. But for the present, what we want to do is we want access to the whole file system. So that's going to be under access, and we're going to come down to this drop down and select file system. So now when we play and run our program, you'll see that now we actually have access to the file system itself. So I can come here to the root directory, and I can select these, any of the directories I want in my file system. And obviously with other operating systems, you can have read and write restrictions, unlike Windows, which will just let you write over any of your system files as well. So just be careful using the right dialogues. All right. So now we have access to that. The first thing I think we should do is, if you'll notice, our file dialog is sort of stuck in the parent window, and normally file dialogs will pop up and you'll have access to them outside. So let's set that up as well. So two quality of life things. First, we're going to make our size a little bit different. So 450 wide, maybe let's make it 500 pixels wide, and then let's make it 400 pixels tall. And now you can see it'll by default have access to that. So the first thing we want to do is make this a separate window. And how do we do that? We have to come into project settings, and under project settings, under window, we're going to have to select the advanced settings. And if you scroll down, now that the advanced settings are here, you'll see embed some windows. And if we just turn that off and hit close and hit play, you'll notice the file dialog is already present. Now, if you'll notice, it's stuck and I can't get the title bar, and that seems to be a bug. So hopefully that'll get fixed. But if you resize it, it'll pop the window down. But the better way, and probably the easier way to do it, is rather than initial position absolute, simply say primary screen center, or actually main window screen center is probably the way you want to do it, because that way it'll pop into wherever your Godot dialog window is. So if we do here, now it'll pop in the center and you don't have to worry about that. Like I said, hopefully that absolute position will get fixed, but for now, to get the handlebars, just have it start in the center. All right, so what's next? So now we have this file dialog. Let's see how we can actually use it in code to get ourselves a path. Let's come here and make a script. And we will call this the file dialog save file. We'll come over here, we'll just hit Control after we drag, and it'll make us a dialog. So the first thing you might want to do is change the where it starts. And as you can see, where it starts is the current directory of your project. But maybe you wanted to start, let's say, in the root file system. So one of the things to realize is the root subfolder is not actually how you want to change that directory. And I'll show you why. If we select the root subfolder and we hit and we start a program, you can see I've lost my interaction with the file dialog. You can no longer select subfolders by double clicking and opening them. And why is that? Well, it turns out that the root subfolder is there to restrict the user's ability to traverse it. And I'm not sure it totally works correctly because, for instance, if you put the slash, you no longer have access to any of the subfolders, even though you probably should, since this is the root of the file dialog, and it should only restrict access to the parent directory, but it's somehow also restricting access to the child directories from that. So let's say we want to change directory to root. How can we do that? In, for instance, the ready function, we can come here, and now that we've gotten access to our file dialog, we can look at the current directory property. And if we set that equal to, for instance, slash, which is the obviously the Unix specifier for the root, now when we hit play, you'll see we'll start out in the home directory and we will have access to the subfolders there. All right. So the next thing we want to do is actually interact with this file dialog and get a path. When the user hits save, we want to actually get that path. So how do we do that? We're going to do that through the event system. And if we come over here to FD save, you'll notice that in the node, you'll see that there's a few signals that it has. And one of those signals is file selected. And so that's what we're going to use for our file dialog to actually select the files. There is a directory selected, and that's if you're using, when you come back over, for instance, to the inspector, under file mode, you can actually do save, or you can open a file, or open a folder, or open any. And if you select any of those, you'll be able to trigger those other signals. But for this tutorial, we're just going to stick to just a single file rather than multiple files or folders. But that's how you would access multiple files. All right, so let's go back to our node and our file signals, and we're going to select the file signal and we're going to connect it. So on FD save, file selected, and we'll connect that. So as you can see, it's going to send a path. So let's just go ahead and print that path, and I'll show you what it's going to show us. So now if we run our program and we select, I don't know, oh goodness, just need a file. All right, here we go. And we hit OK. Now, of course, with the save dialog, it's going to warn you, hey, this file exists. Be careful, you might overwrite it. Even though right now we're not going to be overwriting anything since we're just having the path. But as you can see down here, it has shown us that whole path. So how can we use that to actually get a file? So we can simply make a variable, and we'll call it save file, and we'll set it, we'll get access to that. And so to get access to a file and to write a file, you use the FileAccess class, and there's a static method. Rather than new, we're going to use open, which will call new, but on a path. And as you can see with the pop-up, we have a path that's a string, and then flags, which are going to be the read-write and read-write file access. So what path do we want? Well, we just want the path. So I'm going to delete that. And since we're going to be writing data to the save file, I'm going to select the FileAccess.write enum, which is the write access. So now we have a file access, and again, I'm going to warn you to be careful, especially since we've set our current directory to the root file system. Any file you select will overwrite this. And now we can, for instance, write some data. So we have save file dot, and let's just do store line, and we'll just say hello world. All right. So let's run our program, and our default is in the root, but let's just be careful with that. So I'm going to just go into temp, and we'll just call it test data.dat, and we'll hit OK. So now let's actually go into our file system, and we'll go to the root, and we'll go to our folder temp, and we'll look at testdata.dat. And there it is, hello world. So we've written our file to that path. All right. So now how do we get access to that and open it for reading? Well, we're just going to make another save dialog, or actually file dialog. So we'll come back to our node, and I'm just going to duplicate this since it already has sort of a pop-up in the other Windows settings that we want already set. And I'm going to duplicate it, Control D, and I'm going to rename this FD load. In this case, instead of being file mode save, we want it to be open, and I'm just going to open a single file. We'll give it access to the file system. Again, we're not going to set the root subfolder there, and we'll hit stop and we'll hit play. And as you can see, now I have File Dialog, and it's updated the title. So as you can see here, when I selected the open file, it went down to the title and it switched it to open a file. Now you can change that to whatever you want. You can call it you can customize the title that you want. And let's get access to that load dialog. I just come in here and holding down Control. So now I have access to my load dialog. And how do we deal with that? Well, remember, we come to our node and we're going to connect the signal, the file dialog load signal. All right, there we go. And then we're going to disconnect this old signal since that's on the save dialog, and then we're going to connect this here, and we're going to do on FD load file dialog. So now we have a second function, and as you can see, since we already know it's going to pass in the path, we'll make a load file. And again, we're going to set it equal to FileAccess.open. And the path is the path that's going to get passed in by the file dialog. And in this case, we're going to read it. And let's just have a look at what we get. So we're going to get line, and I'll just print that. All right, so let's run our program. And now that we have the file dialogs, we're going to save the file, and I'll just have it saved to temp new data dot, let's call it text this time around. So that's an issue. So I think it won't work if you just put in the path up there. So unfortunately, under save a file, you can go to the temp folder, but then um, you're going to have to actually put the file down here. So test.txt. Okay. Okay. So let's make sure we're doing this right. Under save a file. Okay, I think you might have to actually enter the folder and not just have it there. Okay, so that seemed to work. All right, so now we've written the file, and now let's see if we can go find it. So we'll switch our path to our temp folder, and there's test.txt, and we'll hit open, and there it's reading from the file. So how do you actually use these? Well, I think the general idea is to start out with the file dialogs set to invisible and open them on some sort of event like a button. So let's just go ahead and add some buttons. Save button, and we'll add a second one called load button, and load button. This should be under the root node. All right, so let's just set this up, save, and load. Let's move the load. Let's move them a little bit here so that they're not jammed up. All right, and let's connect our buttons. So we already have a script. So under save, we're going to do button pressed, connect it, and then let's just come here and connect the load while we're at it. Pressed and connect. So what do we want to do here? Well, on the save button pressed, we are going to want to pop up our file dialog, and that's fairly simple. So we're going to we have access to our FD save file dialog, and we're just going to set visible to equal true. And here we're going to do FD load visible equals true. Now that we've done that, we now have access to file dialogs, and we can click on the button and have it open our file dialogs. And if we wanted to do a little bit of quality control, we can make sure that we're not going to call getLine on a file that doesn't exist or a path that doesn't exist. So we can simply come here and do FileAccess in the static method file exists, and we can check if the file exists, then go ahead and print the data. And so now let's call it just test2.txt under the temp directory. Again, I think it will have an issue if we just let's go back up to our root directory. Just go here to temp, call it test3.txt. Let's see if that, yeah, so fortunately that's not great, but you can do some quality control by making sure that it only works if FileAccess.file exists, and then the path that we've created, and then only store the data if we actually have a valid path. Oop. All right, so that'll get you going with writing. If you want to just do a little bit of just a little bit of extra knowledge, if we want to do some JSON storage, we can come here. Let's make a new, let's see, player data, player say, yeah, player data, and it'll be a dictionary, and we will just have some data here. So we'll have name equals link, and let's store maybe a dictionary. Within a dictionary, we'll have an inventory, and that will equal, let's see, let's have weapons. Let's have a list, magic, sword, and a bomb. And we'll have some food. Let's make that another dictionary, just for funsies. And we'll have potatoes, 4 potatoes, and I don't know, let's have some tofu. Who doesn't like potatoes and tofu? We'll have 5 pieces of tofu. All right, so now that we have some player data stored in a dictionary form, here, let's add some health too. All right. So we have a dictionary. So let's go ahead, and since we're going to save that data and we have access to a path, instead of storing the line, we'll come here and we'll make a JSON or a player data JSON string, and we're going to use the JSON static method called stringify. And what are we going to stringify? We're going to stringify our player data. So now that we have a JSON string, we can write that to our file. So we can take our save file dot store line, and that'll store basically the string plus a line return at the end of the string. And we'll do player JSON string. So now that will write the player JSON string. And then over here on load, well, instead of, we will have it load the file. So we'll have the file dialog tell us the path that the player wants, and we will have it store that in a variable. So we'll have variable, we'll call it raw JSON string. And so we will have that be the load file dot store line. Oh, I'm sorry, actually get line. Right, so we're going to get a line, and that'll be the raw JSON string that we had initially stringified and then put in. And then now we are going to turn that into a dictionary. So new or loaded player data, it should be a dictionary. And we are going to have the JSON library parse that string. So JSON dot parse string, and we are going to have it parse that raw JSON string. And then just to make sure, do a little quality control, we're just going to have it look at, we're just going to have it print out that dictionary. So we'll print the loaded player data dictionary. Let's just make sure all the data looks the same. Now, one of the things to realize is that in the stringify, one of the potential Boolean, or sorry, one of the potential flags is to do sort keys, and by default it's true, so it will resort our data. So right now it's not in alphabetical order. For instance, name is link, health is going to be before, and inventory is going to be before name as well. So let's just see what happens. All right, so we'll hit our play, so we'll save, so we have some data going on, and we'll unfortunately have to have it actually go into the temp directory to save the file, and we will call it, let's see, player data.dat. We'll hit OK, and now we'll go ahead and load this data, and that was back in our temp directory and our player data.dat, and we'll hit open, and there you go. Health is 15, inventory, and then name, of course, it's resorted it, is down here. So health inventory is printing out our guys, and then the name at the end. Good. So now we've both loaded and saved our data, and I hope this was helpful. Just again, be very careful, because if I come here and go to my Windows and then select a file to save, I am going to wipe out an important system file. So be super careful, especially in Windows, where the user has write access to all these system directories, not to overwrite a file. I'm going to close that before I accidentally do what I just told you not to do, and I hope this was helpful.